Hey there, welcome to the Color Timer podcast. I am your host, Vincent Taylor. This is a podcast where we speak to professionals who work with color every day to tell stories. Today we're going to be speaking to Rory Gordon, or that's what her paperwork says, but she goes by Rory Gordon. Rory is an incredibly accomplished colorist for film and television, having worked on, oh my gosh, one of my most favorite shows, Lovecraft Country. She's also an incredible painter and very experienced in working with HDR, which is something I want to chat to her about. And let's get started. Also, don't forget, we're going to use our little color timer and try and keep this is 15 minutes. That's all we've got, so we've got to make it work if I remember to use it. Let's go.
Take your seats because the hourglass is about to turn. We are entering the world of the micro podcast. Explore the craft, creativity, and science of professionals who use color to tell stories. Welcome to The Color Timer with Vincent Taylor.
Hello, welcome. Hi, Rory. Thank you for joining me.
Hi, thank you for having me.
No, it's my pleasure. We managed to get our schedules lined up, which is incredible.
I know, the stars aligned.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. I was stalking you. I was going through your resume, looking at your site and all the rest of it. And because this is a 15-minute color timer thing, I'm going, oh my God, there's so much I want to ask you. But anyway, that's the bet I made. All right, before I forget, I'm gonna start my color timer, so it's all official. And then I'm gonna jump straight in. I was gonna start talking to you about your profession as a colorist and HDR and all of that, and I still want to get to that, but I want to jump into painting.
Yeah.
Because you're a painter.
Yes.
Yeah, tell me about that.
Well, as you know, we spend so many hours in a day, in a week, in a month, and a year on the computer, and really for me, it's just being off of a device feels really, really good. And what we do is we're taking away, right? Like we're working on somebody else's material and refining it and making it better. So in that sense, it's a subtractive art. So for me to have an art that's additive, that like I'm starting with the medium, I'm the first one that adds to it. It just feels really good. It just really changes the way I think. And then also, speaking of additive and subtractive, right? Like you're working on additive color on a display, and I'm working with subtractive color on a piece of paper or a piece of canvas with paint. So I just think, and I like to study. I really like to study. And the type of painting I do, I'll do plein air, going out into nature, what it doesn't have to be nature. I do urban cityscapes too. But going somewhere and just sitting and thinking and observing, or being in my art studio and just, if it's an abstract thing and working on paint, I just think it makes my brain move a little slower. And I think that's when I start to do really interesting things, is when I move a little slower and make less decisions, but really thoughtful ones. I really love it. So yeah, I have a project called Color Time too, where I take the run times of films and TV shows too. I'll divide them into 60, and then I'll paint a square for each of those intervals of time. And then I end up with a color script that goes from the beginning of the film to the end of the film, and you can see how the color changes. And then because I love puns, the reason I started doing this was because of an art show that was looking for submissions, and I was like, well, Color Time is a funny pun, so I'll paint color scripts on clocks, so it will be color time, and you'll actually see that, But anyway, like it really truly started as like a pun joke, but they're really cool. Like they're really watching the color move, and I've noticed some patterns too. Like around 9 o'clock, and pretty much every like movie, TV show, whatever, doesn't matter. And I've done some animation too. You get dark. Like you see the palette will get darker, and I think it's because that story structure wise is the point where it's like the long dark night of the soul, and it's like physically the long dark, like light is also the dark night of the soul right about that point too. So I always just I just think it's fun to study. So that's why, that's what
It's
one reason.
incredible.
Yeah.
That's You've just blown my mind. That is amazing. And it's where how did you learn to paint?
Um, I don't know that I have any formal training in painting. I liked art in, for as a kid. And my partner is in animation, so they know a ton of concept artists, and a lot of our friends are, through the people that my partner has worked with in animation. I've watched them, and honestly, I think following people on Instagram and like watching painters there, it was always something that was like tangential to my work. But I like to study, and I like to try. I have a very deep but narrow interest set. So like color and light, like these are the things that, and my dad's a jeweler. So like he works with,
Oh wow.
that kind of runs in the family. And there are like 3 generations of jewelers that grading diamonds and like looking at light and color. Like it's something that I think is, like very, very deep in, who we are. But
Yeah.
painting is another way to do that. So because there's
I could very easily just because I find this really fascinating, especially because as a wannabe painter, I'm not joking. I just bought a paint by numbers cactus that
I
I'm going to
love
start
that.
doing.
I think because that's study too, right? Like you're studying like
Yeah.
where, they tell you to put the paint, and then you look at it later and you go, wow, that looks really good. How can I do that on my own? And, I
Yeah,
love that stuff. That's awesome.
And look for anyone who wants to look up Rory's website. She's got her paintings on her site, and they're great. I'm looking at them right now. I've got
Thank
some of them up
you.
here, and they're really cool, man.
Thank you.
How big are they? How big are they?
Small usually, because when I go out, I take a little 4x6 canvas cards, like cold pressed paper, because I like to be compact. And even when I've done larger, they're small. I did a calendar of unnameable colors a couple years ago, and even those were I think they were 9x9, so small.
Wait, unnameable colors?
Oh yeah,
What?
it was. So they're like, I've wanted to do another one because I got a lot of people were like, "This is so cool," and I was like, "Really? No." I think I have synesthesia, or a form of synesthesia, where when your brain is like, oh, I get. So anyway, like a lot of times I get it with taste. Like I don't know if you get that when you look at a vector scope. I very much see different tastes as you're kind of moving around in a circle. Like red is kind of salty, yellow is like oily and fatty, and then green is a bitter. And then depending on the shade of blue, it's tart or it's sweet.
That is so cool.
So the calendar I did was like, there was like a magenta shade for 1 month, and it was like a jar of jam that has burst on your floor and you will never clean it up all the way, or something like that. So all the months were like color. They were colors, but they were named it's not about the color, it's about the experience.
That's wonderful. I have in my brain, I have colors for days of the week. It changes sometimes.
Yeah.
But like a Thursday is always a kind of a deep red for some reason.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Anyway, I've got to keep going because I'm going to run out of time. I'm not going to ask you all these amazing questions I've got to ask you. You've worked on so many wonderful shows. I'll wait for your image to come back. It looks like there's a little dropout. This is the joy. This is like live TV. There you are. You're back. It's great. Because I'm not editing this, because it's real time. So
Yeah,
it's like,
go for it.
All right. Let me go. Which question shall I ask you? Let's talk about. So you've done research on applied color science and practical color workflows. Tell me about that. What is that?
Yeah. So to me, color science is the creative of the big picture, and color, as my work as a colorist, is creative of the micro. So it's like macro level systems versus micro level systems. And what I do in the research that I've undertaken in the color science world, it's all about trying to measure things, right? That's what I love about science, is that it is really the trying to figure out how to measure things and communicate them. And when you're talking about color, which is something may emit certain spectra. A light source may emit certain spectra, or a thing may absorb certain spectra. But color is context. Color is a perceptual experience, including the viewer and the display. It's like such a long chain of places there can be variables. And certainly with humans, there's like an organic element to it, right? So like your vision as it was when you were 18 years old is different than it will be when you're 68 years old. So knowing that the whole experience is ephemeral and temporary, I think my goal in all the different topics I've researched has been how to communicate how things are changing and describe the relationship, which is like another reason I think like calculus is so beautiful, for example. It's like trying to describe these nonlinear relationships. Our relationship. Anyway, so I'm also trying to be like, how do I get all my things in the 15-minute window?
I know. The pressure's on, man.
So specifically, the areas I have researched are HDR and how. So the first paper I did for was. And by the way, I have no formal training in math or science. I just I love to, like I said, to study things. So the first paper I did was, I think, in 2018. And I took, because at the time we had 3 first season shows that were all in HDR, and they all used the same color workflow. So what I did is we had, and all of them had standalone HDR deliverables and SDR deliverables, and we had, our obviously suite of color management. So we had the same creative part of the, same grades, and then our ODTs would change depending on the container that we were delivering for. So Rec 709, P3 in a 2020 container. I measured in SDR the contrast ratio between the key side of the face and the fill side of the face in the SDR version and the HDR version. And we did very minimal trims. Really, this was because again, the workflow was so strong, but I wanted to see how the contrast ratio would change in SDR and HDR. And the main conclusion that I came to was that when you have a transform like that, it's basically a math machine that takes one in and gives you one out, right? But depending on the content that you're feeding in, you're going to get a different relational result at the end. So if you fed a very low key image in that had a really dim key and a really dim fill, it could be that both sides of the face would actually get darker, because remember, HDR also depends on blacker blacks to get to that very, very high contrast ratio. If you had a really high contrast image, the key side of the face could increase, and then the fill side of the face could decrease. And so you would end up with overall higher contrast in HDR. And then I would find some examples, really, really bright examples. Like I had one, it was the tick with a character flying through the sky. So both sides very, very bright. And then in the HDR version, both sides of the face were brighter. So that the most interesting observation was that, guess what? Depending on the content that you're putting into your transform or your LUT, if you're working, with everything concatenated, LUT-based workflow, and this is a log-based workflow, by the way, the content that you're putting in is going to change the effect of the color science decisions. So it is worth it to make bespoke decisions on a show-by-show basis. That's the
right.
Whew, I tried to run through that as fast.
That's so good, though. That's like, and my brain's already going, but what about? It's and this is the thing I'm quite enjoying. When I first started this idea of just having this 15-minute chat, I went, is this silly? Is this gonna? But I quite like it, because it keeps you going. All right, let's, and it just, and who's got time? Yeah. Who's got time to listen anyway?
I know.
So,
I know.
All right. I'm gonna get how much? Well, yeah, I've got time for a couple more questions.
Good. I'm having fun. This was fun.
What do I get? So anyway, these articles got published in the SMPTE journal.
Yes.
I guess my question is, tell me about SMPTE. Well, who's that for? What is that?
Yeah, that's the Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers, and that is they do conferences. Let's see, I think I have the mission statement, as I thought you might ask. The mission of the journal is to drive the quality and evolution of motion pictures, television, and professional media through our global society of technologists, developers, and creatives by setting industry standards, providing relevant education, and fostering an engaged membership community. So the big thing that they do is standards. Standards in terms of file formats, in terms of display, like everything. When you think of SMPTE bars, those originate from the Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers. And the big thing is, for me anyway, about the journal is the peer review element of it. It's not, when you publish a book or you publish an article on a blog or something, it doesn't need to go through peer review. When you publish with a journal, it has to go through a committee of people that all say, like, this methodology makes sense. This person, their controls are all in the right place. And that's very, very attractive to me, is the opportunity to be in a peer review situation and have community. Because what we do as colorists, we're so isolated. And I think each post facility can be isolated, and you get like, oh, well, this is the way we do it because this is the way we do it in this facility. But I really enjoy being a part of organizations like that, where you're looking at like I said, the macro creativity of the macro versus creativity of the micro. And people are looking at like, okay, well, what makes the same sense? And I think it's really helpful, especially considering how many different display options people have, and the sheer number of surrounds in which people watch things. I mean, people watch things on the metro on their phones, and, ultimately they find a way to view it and see it. And, there's so many different ways an image can look in an end user situation. I think being aware of the process, the engineering to get it to them, the psychophysics of the displays, it's all
psychophysics.
Yeah.
That's such a great phrase.
Because it is, like I said, color's a perceptual experience. It's not just one measurable, Pantone value. It's the combination of the surround, the person, the display, the choices made, everything from the camera to the lensing. Because, lensing, that has a huge impact on coloring as well. I think about that all the time. Like when we're matching, we don't, we don't know which lens in a set is a DP's favorite. So, we're matching everything, take out all the seams, but like, that's a huge critical choice, which lens in that set was that DP's favorite. I mean, they'll travel as a group, and obviously similar optical qualities, like for a whole lens package, but just these tiny choices, they just ripple so far out downstream. And every time I have clients that are like, they get nervous because they see it in the color bay, and it's like, oh, that's beautiful, but it looks a little different on the mix stage. You have to, I think, my working with SMPTE and being aware of the standard. What I always say is like, standards are important because it's important to know where the standard is that you deviate from. So when we calibrate everything to standards in the color bay, but then that way, like, things could deviate in a lot of different directions, but we know that we started from the ideal point at which everybody else is measuring things. So it is going to deviate in the real world, but it's going to deviate in a lot of different directions. And what we're going to do is we're going to start where we know the deviations also begin from. So
it amazed me. And as because I realized my my sand timer's run out.
Oh, oops.
I'm breaking the rules. No, but it made me think, because the idea behind this podcast was to do like a 12-part first season, and if you're up for it, can you be on season 2? Because
Well,
there's
sure.
so much more. There's so much more I haven't even started, and I would love to keep going. There's more. I wanted to speak to you about HDR specifically, and about that world as well.
Yeah, another world with a lot of decisions.
Rory, thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
Thank
It was
you,
really, really
Vincent.
fantastic.
That's such a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for joining me. I've started doing these. I was originally, when I started doing the interviews, I started to try and introduce the guest, speak to the guest, do the thank yous, do it all in the one thing. But my brain, it just doesn't work. So that's why I'm doing these bookends before and after the interview. But thank you to Rory for coming on board. And I think, if we end up doing a season 2, I'll definitely have to get her back, because there's so much more I want to speak to her about. Thank you to Mixing Light for hosting the show and having me on board. If you're listening to this on the Mixing Light site, you already know what they do, but if you don't, check them out. Look, they're all things kind of to help you as a colorist, and everything from the software into talking about color. And thank you to Filmlight, my friend of the show. Thank you. And Kayla, my producer. And thank you for listening. Like, subscribe, do all that kind of stuff. All right. Cheers. See ya.
The Color Timer, a micro podcast experience.